Hi everyone, welcome to part 2. Okay, Grischuk has just played f5 and Carlsen answered with c5, which kicks the queen a second time, although it fixes the white pawns on dark squares, which, you know, some could argue is anti-positional because white is playing with a dark squared bishop and not a light squared bishop, so in theory his pawn should be on light squares, and also weakens the d5 square. But you know, as I said, these general rules can be broken if the circumstances lead to dynamic play, and that's what Carlsen is aiming for here. It's always worthwhile to break these general rules if something can be gained instead, and it's interesting to see how Carlsen continues in the game. Grischuk answered with queen g6, which is a strong attacking square against the white king, although it's perhaps not the most accurate move. The engines preferred queen d5 or queen e6. After Grischuk's queen g6, he's lost control of the c4 square here, which queen d5 or queen e6 would have maintained. So knight c4 is given to white for free, and he doesn't have to prepare it with something like rook c1 or queen c1 first, and this move knight c4 adds a second attacker to the a5 pawn, which is now impossible to save, and it appears there's no compensation for black, as white is now ahead on the evaluation by just over a pawn. So you know, it's very simple and straightforward play from Carlsen, exploiting the small errors of Grischuk in playing both a5 and queen g6. Of course, Grischuk knows what he's doing. He's an incredibly strong grandmaster, and in playing a5 he was aware that it might fall later, and you know, he also knew that queen g6 would allow knight c4, but he's willing to sacrifice a little material and space if he gets attacking chances of his own, which is clearly what he was playing for here. Now he moved his knight back to f6. Another idea of moving it away is so the queen gains access to g6 from where it was. So knight f6. And Carlsen's provocative play has resulted in the fatal weakening of the e5 square, which his pieces will be ready to use shortly. In fact, he can plant a knight there immediately with tempo on the queen here at g6, and Grischuk was probably more than willing to give up an exchange in order to be rid of that. Carlsen refrained from that option for now and instead played bishop f4, which prevents any immediate f4 pushes from black, which is one of the things that he's playing for here. Doing so will open up the scope of this bishop, and immediately is threatening to take on h3, and then you know, black can also push f3, and there's all kinds of attacking chances there. So this move bishop f4 prevents that straight away, and it also allows knight e5, and if black sacks the exchange then bishop takes e5 and he's got nothing to worry about. So we can have a quick look at what would have happened if Carlsen had played knight e5 right away. Okay, so rook takes e5 is almost definitely best for black. After d takes e5 comes knight d5, and this is a very powerful knight, and it's hard to shift it from this square quickly. It's going to take 4 moves for this knight to challenge it, and obviously the bishop can't, and the only other way is for white to give up the exchange, so, or return the exchange. So it's going to be, you know, a very strong piece posted on that square, and black in the meantime has a lot of targets to aim for in the white pawns here on e5 and c5 and even h3, as I said, and at least immediately it's hard for white to achieve any active play. The best move is probably queen d2 in order to prevent f4, and black can answer bishop e6, taking aim at the loose knights. And after, for example, rook a3, if knight d4, bishop takes c5, and black is definitely getting compensation for the exchange here. So rook a3, and now rook d8, and you know, there's definitely some play for the exchange, and white has to be very careful. For example, if he was to play queen takes a5, snapping up the free pawn, now comes f4, and suddenly black is winning. So This would have been an interesting line to see, and Carlsen was right to deny Grischuk this possibility. Okay, so back to the game. Carlsen has just played bishop f4. So Grischuk plays knight d5, attacking the loose bishop, and Carlsen was prepared to allow the exchange. He played queen d2, so it's going to maintain a piece on f4 and ensure that black isn't able to push f4. Obviously there's no bishop d6 because it is pawn on c5. And also this is prophylaxis against the e3 push, which is another of the attacking ideas that black could have tried. And you know, there's lots of tricks and traps here. White has to be incredibly careful. Carlsen's, you know, making it look very easy to defend, but realistically for anyone else it's not an easy position to hold. So this move queen d2, it also attacks the a5 pawn a third time, so it's definitely a goner now. Carlsen could have snapped it up instead of playing bishop f4, but then there's counterplay for black. So as usual, Carlsen uses prophylaxis and prevents all attacking ideas of his opponent before taking decisive action himself, which is, you know, very clinical and accurate way to play. So this is a very nice multi-purpose square for the queen. Grischuk now got his light squared bishop into the game, bishop e6, and Carlsen now thought for a while and saw no problem with simply snapping up the a pawn. Knight b takes a5. He's taken the necessary defensive measures on the king's side, and thus black has very little in the way of compensation. On the contrary, white has the positional advantage as well as the material advantage. The strategy of shattering black's queenside pawns has been successful, and the black bishop pair is proving ineffective. In particular, the dark square bishop is a passive piece, and it's hard to make it into an active piece. White's pieces are all active and beautifully coordinated, supporting each other, and it's very well played from Carlsen. It's reminiscent of Capablanca with its light touch and flowing harmony. He seems to play with ease in dismantling one of the greatest living Russian players. So Grischuk must now look for counterplay, and he continued with rook e b8, at least getting some pressure down the b file and preventing a later b4 push, because the knight and the rook have it covered. And you know, white may have wanted to play that. He's now got a pawn majority on the queen side, so he could have played for initiative here. So Carlsen now saw at the right time to start using the e5 outpost with knight e5, which is a very strong square for the knight, and it comes with tempo because the queen is attacked. Grischuk moved his queen to f6, and you know, Carlsen can now snap off a second pawn on c6 with tempo, and he's going to be attacking the rook, but he elected instead to retreat his bishop to h2. And you know, it's playable to take on c6 instead, say knight a takes c6, but black is winning a pawn back on b2 after knight takes f4, queen takes f4. If instead knight takes b8, white gets greedy, queen g5 is winning for black immediately. He's going to have to give up his queen to avoid getting mated. If he plays g3, then knight takes h3, it's going to be check, and it's going to discover an attack on the white queen, so it's winning. So knight takes f4, queen takes f4 is best. Now rook takes b2, and white is still better, but there's counterplay for black. Carlsen's choice ensures that black cannot achieve counterplay without giving material of some kind, which is what happened in the game. After bishop h2, rook takes a5, which is something of a desperate decision from Grischuk, but he will be faced with dire passivity unless he tries something. White's answer is forced, queen takes a5, he's glad to win the exchange, and now rook takes b2, so winning back a pawn, which means black is simply a clear exchange down. He does have some play in the center. This knight on d5 is very good, but the bishop on f8 is still very passive. White, on the other hand, has powerful use of the e5 square, and all of his pieces are working. Even the undeveloped rook here on a1 is now supporting the passed a4 pawn. Black will have some play and can create pressure, but as long as white responds correctly, he'll be winning in all lines. So if you had the white pieces, what would you play now? If you want to try and find the correct way to continue, you can stop the video. Rook a b1 was Carlsen's move, and this is the best, all things considered. Also possible was queen a8, which the engines like because it targets c6, but this brings the queen a long way from the action here in the center and on the king's side, and it's better to play with strong piece coordination. Carlsen's move, rook a b1, challenges black's control of the b file, and he brings his last active piece into the game, so it's better. Grischuk answered with rook a2. Okay, that's the end of part 2.